second session of Asia Media Forum 2022. So in this session, we will be discussing the challenges that are facing the Asian media, particularly with digital disruption. And I'm pretty sure many of you have felt that pressure already with AI, social media, and all these things. But for this session, you will hear directly from members of media organizations across Asia. So may I please invite the following onto the stage. So Mr. Taufiqurrahman, Chief Editor of the Jakarta Post Indonesia. And next up, Mr. Mahfuz Anam, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of the Daily Star, Bangladesh, and he's also the Chairman of Asian News Network. Mr. Philip Golingai, Digital News Editor of The Star Malaysia. And next up, Ms. Juliet Labog, Javellana, Associate Publisher of the Philippines Daily Inquirer. And Mr. Ravindra Kumar, Editor of the Statesman India. And Nattha Komolvadhin will be the moderator for this session.
Good afternoon, Swadika, and thank you very much, Nattha, for introducing our panel discussion. And welcome you all to this afternoon discussion on challenges and roles of Asian media. Last week, Southeast Asia was in global spotlight because we have Big Three Summit, ASEAN Summit in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, G20 in Bali, Indonesia, and APEC in Bangkok. And we could see how the world leaders pay so much attention to Russia-Ukraine war, geopolitics between the US and China. And then they also need to discuss how the world economy can be better after COVID-19. So that's the big issue facing world leaders. And of course, it's the issue that media community in the region has to pay so much attention among Asian countries, not only in Southeast Asia, but of course in South Asia and Asia in general as well. So it means what's going on in regional politics is interrelated with global player in global politics. And also, that's the question back to the media, how you can report all these global politics in terms of global security, regional security, back to your audience in the country, in which each country also facing internal politics and deep division. And it means that your local audience have different interests. They may not have strong interest in global politics. And I understand and I believe that it's the question facing us as the media capacity, how you can raise concern of global politics to your local audience. And it's the issue that the panel in the morning also discussed, how the Thai audience may not be aware very much of foreign policy, but Thailand is also facing challenges on foreign policy this year and beyond. And this morning we discussed a lot how President Jokowi has been quite outstanding in the world stage as the president of G20. And I don't know what's response among Indonesian people. So I'd like to begin with you, Taufiq. Can you tell us how the media cover the G20 summit and how do people respond? How do Indonesians respond to this summit? Do they really care with the role of the president in this summit?
But before I begin, I should thank Thai CBS, Thai PBS, Thai PBS World, and ANN, who has been very kind to invite me to join this session. And I joined this morning session, and I heard the name Indonesia mentioned a lot, but I didn't catch the Thai language, so I just kind of get the English, some of the English expression. And you just mentioned that there's a lot of discussion about Indonesia this morning regarding the sort of leadership of G20, which I think I can understand that this is really bring spotlight not only to Indonesia, but also to the world, which not only surprised people outside of Indonesia, but surprised us as well. Because I don't know if you're aware of this, but President Jokowi has been foreign policy he's been averse to anything international politics. Even until this year, he hasn't made the time to speak at the UN. So when he decided to take up the initiative to travel to Ukraine and also to meet with President Putin, and he made all the effort, he pulled all the stops to make G20 leadership a success. That's quite surprising for us as well, because we're not used to seeing him playing international role. And with all the declaration, the leaders' declaration, and also how President Mr. Xi and Mr. Biden managed to see each other in person in Bali, and also on top of the big summit itself, you have a lot of bilateral talks on the sideline with positive result. So I can imagine the response outside of Indonesia has been also very good. So yeah, and the next question for us, for a sort of a lame duck president, because President Jokowi will still be in office for another 2 years, and usually you don't see a president in this position with only 2 years left, trying so hard to impress the world. So now what we're trying to gauge is sort of what is the ultimate goal for Mr. Jokowi himself, and we think that he has done a lot in the past 7 years, and he wanted his legacy to be sort of carried on, and there's going to be election coming up in 2024, and he wanted to make sure that all the things that he has done will be preserved, because politics in Indonesia, and this is politics anywhere else in the world, if you have a new government, a new president coming to office, you expect them to sort of dismantle all your legacy. And President Jokowi doesn't want that to happen, because he has done a lot, or at least he thinks that he has done a lot in the past 7 years, and he wanted that legacy to be preserved. So I think the primary motivation for the president to be a successful G20 leader is sort of, this is going to be, the icing on the cake for his legacy, and then this he will use because he's going to be barred by constitution to serve another term. So he's going to use all the achievement, including the G20s, to sort of maintain some of the power relation that he has accumulated in the past 7 years, to have a possible successors to his administration that will be friendly to some of his policies in the past, that he can sort of control some of the center of powers, or wants to pull some strings whenever possible. So I think that's sort of the primary aspiration of the current administration with G20. This is a big success, and he wants to capitalize on the success for the next stage in Indonesian politics.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just one bit, because as a journalist who cover foreign affairs for quite some time, people in Thailand always ask me, why do we have to pay so much attention to what's going on outside the country? Just don't know whether the role of President Jokowi at this stage make Indonesians feel so much more aware of foreign policy and positioning of Indonesia in the world stage.
Yeah, I think G20 has not been something that is easily understood by most Indonesian. I think the Jakarta Post, as the only English daily in the country, we know very well that our audience has been traditionally small, and most Indonesian doesn't care about foreign policy. But I think one of the key success of President Jokowi is turning G20 from sort of global elitist agenda into something that most people, laymen or people in Indonesia, can easily understand. He's doing this sort of PR campaign, and this includes his trip to Ukraine and Moscow, is that he wants the Indonesian people to just see him meeting Zelensky or his meeting Mr. Putin, and also bringing Biden and Xi to Bali. That's some of the things that Indonesian people can easily understand. And seeing the president rubbing shoulders with some of the biggest names in global politics has been quite a success for Mr. Jokowi. And yeah, now he's been seen as sort of one of the most successful president in the country with a great foreign policy credential. So some of the agendas, energy transition, pandemic preparedness fund, this is something that most people in Indonesia don't understand at all, but they just see the pictures of Jokowi meeting Zelensky or Jokowi meeting Mr. Putin, and also having the world leaders planting mangrove in Bali. That's a big PR campaign from Mr. Jokowi, and he has been good with PR throughout his presidency or throughout his previous term as Jakarta governor. So yeah, most people don't understand the issue, but they take a great pride and joy from having their president rubbing shoulders with world leaders.
That's why the world event, the world summit, and image is really significant, because from media perspective, I also remember, not quite on substance, but the image is quite powerful in terms of Jokowi meeting with Zelensky, President Zelensky and President Putin, and also Elon Musk. I mentioned to you before we came on the stage. Mr. Kumar, also on the same event, G20, we also see the handover of the presidency to India next year. We see Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the world stage. But of course, he was in world news quite often, very often. But how do you see the role of India next year? Because India will have to resume to take the role of president in G20 next year. What the geopolitics between the US and China affect India at the moment? We know that India has your own voice. And what's the positioning of India among these two superpowers? And for media capacity, how do you see it? How do you cover this geopolitics?
I'll answer this in two parts. First, I think a little bit of historical perspective is necessary when you're looking at Indian foreign policy. India has historically had a contrarian foreign policy. When the world was divided into blocs, India sort of got into the leadership of what was called the non-aligned movement. It stayed away from bloc politics until in the late 60s and early 70s, it kind of hitched itself to the Russians, to the Soviets. Thereafter, over the last 20 or 25 years, it seemed to get a lot closer to the United States, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It got closer to the United States. And bear in mind that India's location and its strategic compulsions are such that it has historically seen China as a kind of an adversary. We have fought a war with China in 1962, which of course we lost, but we have historically seen China as an adversary. So logically, you would expect that in any conflict or any tension between the United States and China, especially after India got into the American camp after the nuclear deal, that we would side with the Americans. So but notwithstanding that, it has been a difficult balancing act, which so far the Indian Foreign Office and the Prime Minister have managed quite successfully. They have managed to walk the tightrope, especially in the context of the war in Ukraine. You would have expected India to take a position that was pretty much on the side of NATO and the United States, but it hasn't done so. It has maintained equidistance. Now, coming to your question about G20, I think all of us need to understand that as we stand today, of course, 2 years is a very long time in politics, But as we are placed today, it is almost certain that Prime Minister Modi will be returned to power in 2024. It is almost certain. The only question is whether he will have the same majority or a greater majority, or whether his numbers will be reduced a bit. But it is almost certain that he will be India's next Prime Minister. That is what all the political pundits say. So I don't think the Prime Minister is really looking at international engagements or his involvement with G20 specifically from the point of view of domestic politics. On the contrary, there is a very strong narrative which is being built in India that projects Mr. Modi as a leader of the world. For instance, there was a stray statement made by, I think, the President of Mexico, suggesting that the Pope, the United Nations Secretary General, and Mr. Modi should be the three conciliators in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You will be amazed at the kind of play that got, especially in state-sponsored media in India. State-sponsored and those who support the Prime Minister, because it fitted the narrative which is being created of Mr. Modi being a kind of a supreme leader of the world. I think in a later segment you're going to look at fake news. One of the pieces of fake news which gathered a great deal of traction in India last year was, it was circulated on WhatsApp, and it said that Nostradamus had predicted that the supreme leader of the world would be a man named Narendras. And a lot of people...
How's the response in India?
Oh my God, it got traction like you can't believe it. It was being forwarded by everybody to everybody else.
People love it?
Oh, people loved it. People got titillated by it. I don't know, many people believed it. Many people who are his followers believed it. But he is really looking at a leadership position. So what would India's role in as leader of the G20? You see, we all seem to forget that G20 was to begin with an economic grouping. Suddenly it's become a political and strategic grouping, which it was not meant to be. It was meant to provide a platform for the world to get together economically. Now, since it has become a sort of a strategic grouping, for instance, the highlight of the G20 in Bali was the meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping, and not on multilateral economic arrangements, which you would have expected would be the logical thing after the pandemic and after the world economies having taken a beating. We have got into strategic affairs. So I suspect that Prime Minister Modi's leadership of G20 will try to seek solutions, and I think the obvious one would be the Ukraine war, and where he does have a role to play in the sense that he has counseled Putin quite publicly about this not being an era for war. I think there will be an effort by the Indian Foreign Office to bring some kind of settlement on the table. So I hope I've answered the 2 points that you wanted answered.
Thank you. So it's still in question when the war will finish or when the war will come to an end. And if it's still going on next year, so we should see what's the role of presidency of G20 is going to do as Prime Minister Modi. To Bangladesh, Mahfuz, Bangladesh has economic development, and Prime Minister also designed the way to maintain good relations with neighboring countries like India and China. So from media perspective, how do you see Bangladesh position in the relation with neighbor like China and India?
Well, like Mr. Modi, my Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina also wants to be a global leader.
everyone wants to be
and
leader.
like Mr. Erdogan and like so many others. And of course, my leader has, being a woman, has a special sort of a place of her own. And she has been the Prime Minister for now 14 years. She's very strong on environmental issues, social issues, on women's rights. So these are also very favorite international issues. So no, jokes aside, she has made a good impression. She has been a very powerful, effective leader of Bangladesh. I am a very big critic of hers, but on the issue of foreign policy, I am a big supporter. I think previous to her, it used to be like one regime being very close to India, another regime very close to China, and vice versa. But she is the first one who has taken the relationship with India to an absolutely unbelievable height. I mean, there is really very, very good rapport between India and Bangladesh at the moment. And at the same time, she has allowed Chinese investment in Bangladesh in a way that we never saw before. So this, if you like, juxtapositioning of relationship with China and India simultaneously with Bangladesh's economic growth, I think is something really to write home about and praise her for it. However, if I may take the advantage of the mic, Bengalis never want to leave the mic, you know. No, on the issue of media, I think there is something happening globally that must, if you like, make every media person, wherever they are located, be it in Thailand or India, Indonesia or in Latin America, things are changing for the profession. First of all, I think democracy is on the wane all over the world. Populism, nationalism, religious fundamentalism, this whole, sort of use of the media to personalize politics, all of it is actually hampering independent journalism. There is also, if you like, the climate change, the climate crisis is giving, if you like, more and more power to governments to do things because they are saying, listen, the whole society is in danger, so don't criticize me for lack of freedom or this, that we need to do X, Y, Z. And that's one thing. The other is the rise of what I would call the surveillance state. Each government today is far more powerful than ever before to surveil the government, opposition, the surveillance. And surveillance, the person surveilled is usually the opposition, which includes, in a sense, the media, because media is supposed to keep the power on check, the watchdog role. So government's capacity to influence the media, to surveil the journalists, to sometimes put them to jail. Putting in jail is like an old method. Now you demonize them. You say that they are anti-national. You say they don't want the progress that this government is bringing about, so he's an enemy of the country or something like that. And in this context, the rise of the social media is a huge, huge, huge phenomenon. The rise has been, it has really democratized people's capacity to participate in social affairs. They may be irresponsible, they may be fake news, they may be expressing falsehood or even prejudice, but they are able to express. Never before in the history of the world was an individual able to express themselves, and through YouTube and Facebook, they're up there. And some of the issues have been well dealt. For example, like when a journalist was accused of a falsehood, the social media took it up. And within hours, there were thousands of followers of that tweet or that position. So on the one hand, it is democratizing, but on the other hand, it is also a source of fake news. And here, my last comment would be that here lies the opportunity of the traditional media. My belief is that social media is like a tsunami which is sweeping the world over, but soon enough, this is my belief, that individuals will get a bit tired of the fake news or or the unedited news that is flooding the social media. And they will then start thinking, okay, I've heard it on the Facebook, but is it true? So I will go to in Jakarta Post. I will go to Statesman. And only when the Statesman or Jakarta Post or the Daily Star or the Philippine Inquirer reports the same thing, then people will go believe. So that is our point of survival.
I share this belief, but the only thing is I need to add a rider. That if we are wrong, by the time we are proven wrong, we'll both be dead.
So let's wait until the best. The best has yet to come. Social media is around for more than 10 years, and we could see how the noise is happening in our daily reporting. And I'm sure it's big challenges for all the media community, not only in Asia, but in the world. But I'll be back to this point later. Let me a bit prodding on geopolitics. We saw Vice President Kamala Harris was in Philippines after she was in Bangkok for APEC, and she also met President Bongbong. And she also went to Palawan, the island very on the edge of South China Sea. So I'm sure the Filipinos feel the tension of geopolitics between the US and China on South China Sea issue. How does the Filipino media report on this? And what's the view of population in general in response to this tension between the two superpowers?
Thank you, Nattha, and good afternoon to everyone and my fellow editors. Well, our president told Vice President Kamala Harris that she's going to Palawan just to see the beaches. Of course, she said, no, that's not the life I've chosen in these times. But her visit is really all for the symbolic firepower, etc. It's for the, the optics, just for the optics of it, because we always view the US in terms of our problem with China, right? So we are a small nation, but we're torn between the United States and China, and we have a very significant part in the Asian geopolitics because of the South China Sea. So previously, our president, by the way, went to APEC and ASEAN as the new kid on the block. If you are the supreme leader, our president is the new kid on the block because he was just elected about 5 or 6 months ago. So, but he made all the right noises, calling, joining the call against the Russian invasion, peace in Myanmar, and etc. So when the US Vice President went to the Philippines, it's the first time in 6 years that we have the highest ranking American leader coming to the Philippines. And it sent the powerful message that the United States is with the Philippines in terms of our conflict, our problem with China. And in fact, she said in a very categorical way that the US, because we have a mutual defense treaty, that any attack on the Philippines, the United States will come to our aid. And that's been such an ambiguous term in our mutual defense treaty for many decades. And when the US Vice President came and said, we will defend you, that's such a big thing, But Filipinos, the local, the people are only seeing this in terms of our Filipino fishermen who are deprived of livelihood in the South China Sea because the powerful Chinese Coast Guard and the fishing vessels are, kind of having an aggressive situation there. So she went to Palawan precisely to send that message to China that we're back in the loving arms of each other. Philippines and the US were lovers again because our previous president pivoted to China. President Duterte. He cursed the United States and he went with China. So he changed a little bit our foreign policy towards China. The Philippines is such a long ally of the United States, and in fact, most Filipinos the highest trust rating is for the United States, and the lowest is for China. Because of the problem in the South China Sea, we have many islands that have been occupied by China. But economic relations with China is okay. It's only the problem with the West Philippine Sea. So I think that's a very important visit for the Vice President. And also our President categorically said that he could not see the future of the Philippines without the United States. And that's correcting, the Duterte pivot to China, which was a little bit problematic because the Philippines actually gained had a very big role in stability in the South China Sea, in the region, because in 2016, we went to the arbitral tribunal and we won that ruling. That ruling is very important, it's significant for the world, not only for Asia, because it provides stability in the South China Sea, that countries need to, the claimant countries need to respect the sovereignty of each other. And it's important for freedom of navigation. But then our President Duterte in 2016, he set aside that ruling, because he wanted to get more investments from China, which did not really materialize. So our new president now, he said that we're going to abide by that ruling, we're going to stand by that ruling, and that's consistent with the position of the United States, the position of the EU countries, who are always invoking that ruling, in ensuring the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So I think those two developments are very important. And I think that our citizens are appreciative of that finally we're correcting the problem, in relation with China and the US, and that we're back to more or less having some stability in the South China Sea.
Could the media report freely during President Duterte, because he tend to choose side with China on South China Sea? So how did the media feel? Can you be very critical or asking questions in terms of reporting to previous president?
Admittedly, there's like a climate of fear because he closed down, the biggest television network in the Philippines. We couldn't believe that it will happen, but it happened. And as we've been discussing, Maria Ressa is our Pulitzer, Peace Prize Pulitzer because of the prosecution or persecution by President Duterte. But in terms of the media reporting that during the President Duterte's time, we still went ahead, with all those critical reports because that's our mission, right? That's our mission as the journalists and media, is to tell the people what's going on, what's the truth, what's the information. But as I said, admittedly, there's a climate of fear that we will be the next one to be closed down. So when he went out of office, it's like, thank God.
Thank you, Juliet. Philip, I'm sure all eyes are on Malaysia right now with hung parliament, and we don't know what's the king decision on forming the next government, especially on choosing the prime minister. So can you tell us more the politics in Malaysia, and how do you see the role of the media in reporting this right now?
First of all, Malaysia has a new prime minister. He is Anwar Ibrahim. So at around,
finally,
yeah, 2 hours ago, I think the royal family have decided, and it's Anwar Ibrahim. And just wanted to relate a bit. When I arrived yesterday, the big question for me was, who will be your prime minister? And then one thing I noticed is that everybody mentioned Anwar, Anwar, Anwar. Nobody really know the other contender who had a bigger chance of becoming prime minister, which is Muhyiddin. And then the reason is very simple, actually. In Malaysia, in terms of international readers, there's only 3 people they know. Number one, Mahathir. I think everybody knows Mahathir. He lost badly in the last election. And then number 2 will be Najib Razak, our prime minister. I think you all know his bad boy reputation. He's now in jail. And then the third person is Anwar Ibrahim. Okay, why I mention this is because the fact that you heard of Anwar Ibrahim is very simple. It's because Anwar Ibrahim, when he was in power, that was in the 1990s, that was in 20 years ago, he was the deputy prime minister, and he loved to be internationally recognized. He will work hard to be named like Time magazine, ASEAN leader, Asia Week, etc., etc. So he worked very hard for this international exposure. That's why you all know him, and you don't really know Muhyiddin, or even our last prime minister, that was Ismail Sabri, and then it was also Muhyiddin. And then the reason you don't hear about Ismail Sabri is because he didn't really care about international reputation, etc., etc. And then when I was talking to some ambassadors earlier, they said, oh yeah, your foreign minister is more powerful than your prime minister in terms of foreign policy. Okay, so my prediction is, now that we know that it's Anwar Ibrahim who is the prime minister, now that he's in prime minister, he'll consolidate his position, and you wait, sooner or later, he will step into international limelight, because that is Anwar. He will want to be a world leader. Now that he's a Malaysian leader, he'll be world leader. And he's going to compete with people like Jokowi, Hansen, Modi, whoever. Yeah, Malaysia will, most probably Anwar will be the world leader of ASEAN or even Asia, because that is Anwar. So my prediction is, if he survives, because I don't think this current government is that stable, because it's like half-half, and then the other group is also quite strong. They might pressure, unless it's a unity government, but I don't think they will stop at that. So if Anwar survives, and then he's much more stable, he has the time, he will be a world leader. I bet on it, and most probably he'll go for Nobel Prize or something. Thanks.
Can you play out a little bit for us what the role Anwar will be playing in Malaysia? Because I believe that the road won't be easy for him to take this role as prime minister. And what will be the role of the media to work with his government, to scrutinize or to have checks and balance on his government in the near future?
Okay, just explain a bit the media. After the opposition won for the first time in 2018, Barisan Nasional dominated politics since 1957. So after GE14, that is 2018, there was a new, the opposition became government, and Mahathir was the prime minister. And the irony is, Mahathir really controlled the press in terms of, they call it like kuku besi. It's like, what is it? Yeah, yeah, iron fist, kuku besi. But then when he became prime minister after that, he didn't control. So actually it's a really fresh of breath air actually for journalists. It's like you can write, because I write a column on politics, so I actually can write freely actually. So in terms of media, it will be very fair, I think. And then definitely the problem with Malaysia, not say the problem, the thing about Malaysia is there will be media, especially the online media, that is actually owned by certain political parties. For example, I just don't want to name, but just say this Portal X is controlled by Anwar's people. His good friend is the owner, and then the other one is actually his rival. So if you know, if you understand the game, like for me, when I read from this portal, oh yeah, that is that politician saying it, etc. So yes, definitely there will be. It's actually not control. It's actually the bias. The bias will be there. But then but I think it's because we have a law to sue people, etc., etc. So I think they will not play that. The media that we should be a bit worried is the unknown media, the one that you don't see the publisher, but it's still influential. The one that doesn't have an editor there, but people believe in it. So that's the one that we should be worried. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Philip. So let me turn to how the media work under the circumstance of media disruption. Mahfuz, you mentioned that in the near future, you believe that traditional news organization will return like phoenix from the ashes? Because right now we can see how social media or influencers are having their own voice, and the new generation tend to listen or have access to these people who are used to social media as their voice. So why do you believe that in the end, I don't know when, news organization will have more voice, impartial voice, and people will turn their attention to the media again?
No, because I fundamentally believe that democracy will return. I mean, democracy is now under threat all over the world, including in the West. I mean, if you like, America is being taken over by white supremacy. Europe is getting into such anti-immigrant mindset, which will lead to their own, if you like, non-democratic ideas. In our part of the world, nationalism, religious fundamentalism are dominating the mind. And all of it goes against democracy, against tolerance, against excuse me, multiplicity of views. So this cannot be the fate of humanity, in my view. So, and if you look at history in a very big scale, it has always gone, like undulated waves. Sometimes we go into, so really the democracy in the latest stage began after the Second World War with the defeat of fascism. So now with 75 years of Second World War, we have forgotten the evils of dictatorships and fascism and ultranationalism. So we are being dragged into that phase, and unfortunately, technology is helping the, if you like, the dictators. I believe that ultimately the spirit will overcome and democracy will survive. Now, the reason for it is that the future will be much more interactive. I mean, we instantly know Anwar Ibrahim got elected 2 hours ago, and here we are talking about it. This was not possible. So, with all these interconnections, if we are not tolerant, then we are just going to be sitting on a volatile world all the time. And I think humanity will have that good sense to sort of come back and stabilize on that. And my other point is journalism itself. I blame the social media for fake news, but there's a lot of blame to be given on the legacy media, because we also became very complacent. Our houses became big, business was big. We, I think, pandered to advertisers much more than to the readers and the viewers. And the social media is taking a revenge on that, if you like, failure of the legacy media. It's like a wake-up call for us that, listen, you have forgotten your readers and the viewers. You have been listening to the advertisers much more. Unless the legacy media learns from this lesson and becomes more responsive to what the people want and what the people are thinking, then we cannot revive. But I believe that we will learn. We are learning. I think all of us are learning. And also, the legacy media is also going digital. It's not that Taufiq is, Jakarta Post is ignoring the digital. Daily Star definitely is investing heavily on digital. So is other newspapers. So in the future, it will be like this. People will get the news first on the social media, but they will come to the legacy media for verification. And that will be the balancing power. So the job for me as an editor is now to hang on to our traditional values of authenticity, of credibility, of multiplicity of views, checking my facts over and over again before going public. If we can live with these values now, which will be difficult, we will have financial problem. Most of us are going bankrupt. If we can hold on to our values, future is ours.
Thank you. What's happening to Jakarta Post? Because you must be dealing with transforming from newspaper to website to digital content. And what's really going on inside the newsroom? Because you must have like senior editor, senior journalist who has to work with young gen reporters. What's the politics in the newsroom and how you survive it?
Yeah, I think what the Jakarta Post has gone through in the past, we've done a transformation in the past 4 years. I think this is not unique to the Jakarta Post because we have challenges to transition towards online publication, while at the same time we have to maintain our print edition. So I think now we're in the stage where we're trying to find a balance between having an online presence, but also we need to maintain the print simply because we have the credibility by still having a print edition. In addition to that, I think a significant chunk of our revenue still come from print. And I think the Jakarta Post is very unique to Indonesia because we're now the only English daily in the country. And although most Indonesian doesn't speak English, or most of them doesn't care about foreign policy, but I think the Jakarta Post have a very strategic position in that we're the only conduit for everyone in the country if they want to speak to international audience. And I think Indonesia being a sort of middle power in ASEAN and also in Asia, I think that makes our role in the Jakarta Post, well, I should not judge myself or the Jakarta Post too highly on this, but being the only English daily in the country have sort of a strategic position in a way that, so I think geopolitical competition has affected us in the newsroom. This is before we're discussing on the staffing issue. But I think the geopolitical competition between the U.S. and the United States has affected us directly in what we're doing in the newsroom because, and I think this happens also with other newspapers in Asia or in the region. China has a lot of money and they can buy ads. They can have all sorts of commercial deals with us. And Jakarta Post is no exception because this is a good money. They pay for ads. But given the frequency of us carrying promotion from China, or we have a joint publication with China Daily, for instance, we have questions from the US side of the equation. People from the embassy comes to us asking, why do you carry this news so very often? So those kind of intrusions comes to the newsroom, and that's sort of on the global level. On the more domestic level, and this happens anywhere else in the world, the geopolitical competition has affected how political elites operates in Indonesia, because you have senior government officials, you have businessmen having their stance of promoting Chinese interests. But on the other hand, you have senior government official. They decide that, okay, America is the way forward for us. So you have inter-elite competitions affected by geopolitical situation outside of Indonesia. So, and the Jakarta Post has been the conduit for that competition. A pro-Chinese official, if they want to say something, they go to the Jakarta Post, or a pro-American official, if they want to say something to influence the decision, they go through the Jakarta Post. So you can see that, and also on the business side of things, because in Indonesia, I think it's sort of a myth to consider that media has been purely independent, because I think since the modern times in Indonesia, all news media has been affiliated with political parties, or now it's mostly big business. So it's very difficult for us to find a really independent media in the country. So now, and Jakarta Post has been really a small operation, and we have been praised for our independence. But at the end of the day, we need to survive, and sometimes we have to bow to political pressure or business pressure. So I don't want to paint a rosy picture about, sort of the media independence, because at the end of the day, this is still a business operation, and you have to justify your action. And some of those geopolitical tensions, some of those geopolitical conflict has seeped into the newsroom, simply because of the business calculation that we make, also some of the political calculation that we make. So yeah, it's not really a sort of a rosy picture of media independence, but that's the reality that we have to deal on a daily basis, sort of to navigate the murky water in politics and come out of it alive, probably, yeah.
And it's been situation for a long time dealing with business side and editorial independence. Yes. So it's still even more intense in this age.
Yeah, especially now, and I think Mahfuz have mentioned earlier about the pressure from the tech companies, because they have taken all our lunch money. So now we're left with very small that we have to compete with one another. So government ads, for instance, or Chinese-funded ads, advertorials, inforials, make up a significant chunk of our income. So I think the government or those who want to pay ads to us, they understand that we are on a very difficult situation financially, and the only way for us to sort of, having a healthy performance is by taking up these ads. So it has been a conflict between having to, take up this offer, but at the same time maintain our independence. This has not been a success. This has been always a success, because I remember this is, you mentioned earlier about the visit of Kamala Harris to Philippines. I remember this when Kamala Harris visited Singapore, and the US government decided to skip Indonesia. And this is early in Biden administration, and I remember I wrote a commentary on this. Okay, America, you should come to Indonesia because Indonesia is very important. And I remember I got a very furious response from the other side of the equation. You can imagine who they are. So this is sort of the environment that we're having right now in Indonesia. Simply, again, back to my earlier point about Indonesia being sort of the biggest player in Southeast Asia, and we sort of wields that influence. So yeah, through us, some of these people or some of these political players are trying to sort of influence how we operate.
Can I just come in for a minute? There's a new player in the block, and I think it is affecting all of us. Facebook and Google, they are taking away 80% of the advertisement from Bangladesh. So it's not only lunch, it's lunch, dinner taking away, we are left with breakfast. Only 20% of the local ad we get, 80% of local ad going to Facebook and Google.
So that's real life that the media is facing nowadays. Ravindra, can you share with us what's happening in India? What's the situation? Especially the population of India is so large, and you must have social division among different age groups who view the media or politics differently. How do you see this played out in social media content? And how do you see the role of the media to try to bridge the gap?
Okay. Yes. It is an easy temptation to believe that social media has a natural affinity with younger people, and that traditional media might have one with older people. I don't think we in traditional media will get very far if we were to follow that. Then we are doomed. I would like to view my audience, or the audience of any serious traditional media player, as perhaps I hate to use this phrase, but perhaps as the aristocrats of readers, the upper layer, the creamy layer of readers, people who believe that they are in a position to reflect upon and perhaps participate in the decision-making process. They could be academics, they could be lawyers, they could be politicians, but I don't think we should define them by age, but more by inclination to get involved in the affairs of the world, in affairs of the country. If you start targeting that section of the audience, then I think conventional media might have a more significant role to play than it would. Of course, we all took a huge setback. I don't know how it was in other countries, but I know that the period of lockdown, the periods of lockdowns during COVID, actually saw print media take a huge tumble, because one of the pieces of fake news that was circulating was that newspapers are the greatest carriers of the COVID virus. So there were many residential complexes, gated communities, which banned the entry of newspapers. So that was the time when social media really took off. There was a huge demand for news, which was not being catered to by conventional media. Social media stepped in, television stepped in. Unfortunately, television, which had a great opportunity, Indian television, which had a great opportunity to elevate itself and become a responsible disseminator of news, actually lowered itself. I can give you examples. In fact, I was just jotting down a few examples of the worst kind of fake news that was circulated by reputed television channels. I mean, it'll shock you to know that one of the leading television channels in India actually put out a story that in Saudi Arabia, men had been allowed to eat their wives if they were very hungry.
Serious?
Yes, this was
Isn't
put
that
out.
serious news?
This was put out by a serious television channel. So what I'm saying is that there was, if you count television as semi-traditional media, traditional media had an opportunity to raise itself, but chose to dumb itself down. So I think those of us who believe we are serious media practitioners really ought to target a section of our audience. I think we should forget about being mass market newspapers or mass market purveyors of news. I think we need to focus at a segment that we believe is interested in the affairs of the world and of the country, who would be interested in geostrategic equations, who would be interested in how India is going to play a role in G20 or how Indonesia played a role in G20, on Kamala Harris's visit to the Philippines, who might actually be able to connect the dots of the world and form certain opinions and impressions. I think we will need to cater to that. Now, in order to do that, I think Malaysia is in a fabulous position. Any country which has a fractured political mandate, in other words, a country where democracy is working to the extent that there is equal dissatisfaction with each of the political players on show, is the ideal prescription for the media to thrive. If you have a fragile coalition ruling Malaysia, it's a great opportunity because the media can really be free, and the check on the leading player in the coalition will come from his coalition partner himself. So you will not have people running amok. Where you have dangerous situations, where there are overwhelming majorities of those who are in power, that is when. And mind you, they've got to that position of power through a democratic process. Mr. Modi became prime minister because people voted for him. Sheikh Hasina became prime minister because people voted for her. More people voted for her than did not vote for her. Now, but the stronger the grip on power of the leader, the greater the threat to the media. And this is the challenge that you face in the newsroom. As far as the newsroom itself is concerned, yes, of course. I mean, I'm not even on social media. I took a conscious decision many years ago that I do not have opinions to offer to Facebook or Twitter. I cannot compress my thoughts, as you have guessed already. I cannot compress my thoughts. B, I don't think I can say whatever I need to say in the number of characters that are predefined. And C, I don't think I ought to be responding. That's not my training as a journalist. My training as a journalist is to reflect on something, is to research, and then to offer an opinion. So I allow myself the luxury of both time and the need not to have an instant reaction to everything. I allow myself that luxury. And if I may just briefly, because I think those of you who are not familiar with the network that all of us are part of, the Asia News Network, the network itself, by offering contrary viewpoints on regional questions, plays the role of balancing news. For instance, on, let's say, on the India-Pakistan story, the Indian narrative would be colored very strongly by what the Foreign Office says. But because Dawn of Pakistan is a member, we carry a lot of stuff from the Dawn on the Pakistani perspective. In other words, we put both perspectives before the reader and allow the reader to judge. India-Bangladesh relations at the moment are soaring, but they haven't always been so. But even within the relationship that soars, that is soaring, there are sticking points. And it's important to understand a Bangladeshi perspective. So the Asia News Network, and I think the same applies within ASEAN, where the network's presence is very strong. Having alternate views, hearing alternate voices, makes for a better informed readership and a better informed audience. And I think that has to be the essence of good journalism. It doesn't matter whether it's social or unsocial as we are. It doesn't really matter. Thanks.
Basic quality of journalism, of high quality journalism, has to be maintained in whatever the channel, like legacy media or social media. Philip, you are digital news editor, so you must have lots of information to share with us, behavior of Malaysia, because if we compare with 2018, we saw how young Gen were very active in participating in the election and leading to former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad and Anwar Ibrahim won the election. What happening this time in the election? What can you tell us about the behavior?
Okay, while Ravi was talking just now, I just installed TikTok. But it asked me what I like, scroll or whatever. I didn't have time, plus, yeah. Soon I will be on TikTok. Reason is very simple. Okay.
So you are not only observer.
Yeah. In order to be relevant, you have to be on TikTok now. Okay, maybe it's quite interesting. Like maybe 2 years or 3 years ago, people were saying, Phil, you TikTok. But then we were thinking like, oh, TikTok is for small kids. I mean, like, no, small kids. It's for, it's for kids. Then one of the political analysts advisor was telling me, Phil, do you know that in a small town somewhere in Malaysia, it's called Keningau, the kids there are watching TikTok. Then I'm like, oh, okay, it's quite important, but still not that important for me. But now after this Malaysian election, I just give you a bit of background first. The party that surprisingly did very well was it's called Perikatan Nasional. It's actually, it's a coalition that just started. Okay, why they did very well is very simple actually. What they did is, they had a lot of money first. God knows where the money came. In the previous government, but yeah, shouldn't talk about it. Okay, so so what they did is they hired or paid influencer on TikTok to do TikTok videos on that party, and you can see it's actually quite fake. You know, they paid people, and then the influencer will like, you know, they don't believe what they're saying, but they said it to support that party, and then they put the logo there, and then. They did it for the young voters. And then the young voters, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but it looks like the young voters believe in this. So what does this mean? It means that TikTok can influence the voters, the young voters. Because for them, they rather watch TikTok than even Facebook now, which I am on, and then the media. So just going back to a point by Mahfuz, he said that the newspapers or the news portals are important, but maybe I'll give a distinction. If it's breaking news, yes. I give you an example. Like, for example, yesterday, news portal made a mistake and said that Anwar was PM yesterday. So most people said, wait for the star. We read it from the star. Then it's true. So for us, we didn't report it because it was not true yesterday. So in terms of breaking news, yes, the news portal have credibility. People will check. But the thing is, do we, in the news media, for example, I write a political column. Maybe I know a little bit more than the man on the street. Maybe I know a bit of politics more, so I write about it. But the young or even the old, who do they listen? Do they listen to TikTok or do they listen to FB? And then even on WhatsApp, or because WhatsApp is very popular in Malaysia, you see a lot of strange things that doesn't make sense actually. When you read, it doesn't make sense, but people believe in it. So maybe social media and the messaging apps, they're much more powerful maybe than the media in terms of forming opinions. Because for this, most people actually, they're lazy already. They don't like, last time we used to dominate. We're the only, the only game in town. You have to read the newspaper or you have to watch TV or you watch radio. I mean, listen to radio. But now they have all this distraction. For them that is their news, and they listen to anybody actually who, like, they talk and then say, oh, you should vote for this, blah, 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 blah. And then maybe there's no truth in it, but people do what? So in terms of breaking news, maybe yes. So what do we do as the, like for me also? Okay, maybe my readership is getting older maybe, and then sure, definitely they'll be younger. But then I have to go to their living room in a different way, because the Star Online, they don't go to us anymore. And then I have FB also, but it looks like the younger ones are not coming in. And then those are what? So I need to go into their living room. How do I go into their living room? I have to do TikTok. So maybe I need to dance, but I can't dance. Maybe I need to sing, I can't sing. So I really don't know how to talk politics using this medium. So it's quite scary actually. So how can you be influential? So maybe I need to learn to dance. Or maybe I do kickboxing, because I'm a bit okay with kickboxing. Yeah.
Philip, but can you put substance content on TikTok? You don't have to dance, only on TikTok.
The thing is, the voters, do they want substance? They don't want.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think they'll be interested, like I said, or I talk politics. I don't think they're interested. It's actually what I understand about this politics. This one thing I learned is, number one is emotion. It's all about whether you like or you don't like the person. It's likability. You hate that person, what? So I might as well make just say I'm a politician, I make people like me. And I don't tell them that, oh, this is my policy. My policy is free education or blah, 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 blah. It's more like I got a nice smile and then I can dance. People like me. I mean, in US, it's like that also. If you're good looking, then the other opponent, or you're taller than the other opponent, usually you will win. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are short people who won or uglier people who won. But in general, that's how it is.
I need to turn this to Juliet, because Philippines might have passed through this experience in the last election, because as far as we see was President Bongbong gained so much popularity via TikTok and among young generation, which means social media is really influential politically and can form new leadership in the country. What's your take?
Definitely. So really our president now, and before that he ran for vice president, and he already had this social media strategy, now even using a US technology system to target audiences. And really he campaigned so well on TikTok, TikTok. His supporters are, peddling this story that they have this Yamashita gold, missing gold, something, and that if you vote for him, then you can have a share of that gold. And really many people believe that, and maybe that's why some of them voted for him. So really the social media, TikTok, YouTube is such a game changer, and it really disrupted the industry a lot. For example, the Philippines, 73% of Filipinos access their news on social media. I think for Thailand, it's higher at 81% access their news on the smartphone. So really, like Philip said, the problem is for media is relevance. So all this social media and technology, etc., what they do is to render the professional journalism as irrelevant. But still, there's still hunger for news, and I don't think like I subscribe to Mahfuz's mission to stay the course, because the media is still much needed, especially during this time of conflict, disinformation. In the Philippines, 9 out of 10 Filipinos believe that social media is fake news is a problem. But the irony there is that journalists are the number 2 source of disinformation, according to the study. So what we needed to do is, while we stay on course, producing content that are analytical, all those contexts, etc., to make our citizens more informed, we still need to go to those platforms. We need to go to TikTok, need to go to YouTube, because that's where they are. That's where the young readers especially are. And the Reuters Institute, they came out with a study on online behavior, and they said that around the world, there's a decline in trust and interest in news. But the reasons are funny. The reasons are because the news makes them depressed. It's depressing to them. They're tired of politics. They're tired of news about COVID. But the takeaway there is that readers or people are telling the media that, we want to better understand. You make news more understandable, more reachable, because, people don't pay for newspapers. They just, go to... So I think that the newspapers, the legacy organizations still need to take care, of course, they need to take care of our core readership, which are more about the in-depth, the analytical, political issues. But we still need to cater to those who access their news on social media. And there are ways to entice them, we need to bring them to read the pieces that matter. So that's the challenge, that we need to stay relevant and compete with those TikTokers, YouTubers, Instagrammers, I think so.
Probably to compete with TikToker would be quite
it's
very intense
I think it
and
could
very
be,
difficult.
I think it could be nearly the lingering effect of a lie. If you analyze that, the role of social media and how some lies linger long after they have been proved wrong. For instance, a couple of years ago, there was a WhatsApp, it started as a WhatsApp post, which said that UNESCO had voted the Indian national anthem as the best national anthem in the world. It spread like wildfire. Then some people, people who do fact checks, they checked and they discovered that UNESCO had done no such thing. In any case, how do you objectively assess that national anthem A is better than national anthem B, right? But long after it had been debunked, it was there as stories in mainstream media, it was there. Even last week, I met somebody who said it's a matter of great pride for us that our national anthem was voted the best in the world. So the lie lingers. Now, this is an innocent example. I mean, whether the Indian national anthem is the best or not is immaterial. But what if, I'm taking two hypothetical situations. What if the person who put out the story yesterday saying that Anwar Ibrahim is going to be the Prime Minister of Malaysia, and if today it had not been Anwar Ibrahim, how difficult do you think would it have been for that person to create a narrative that Anwar Ibrahim was to have been the prime minister, but was cheated because of factor A, B, or C. You have the Trump example. A whole narrative was created to suggest, yes, there are election malpractices, there are election frauds. The Republicans have benefited from an election fraud, most famously when George Bush became president. But to start building a narrative before the last vote is counted, to say that this election is being stolen from me, is being hijacked, is possible with social media. And there is a significant number of Americans who actually believe what Trump has been parroting, that the election was stolen from him, that he was the real winner, that 80% of the Republicans believe that Joe Biden is a fraud who's in the White House. So the lie lingers, and this is one of the biggest threats of social media.
And he's back on Twitter.
And he's back on Twitter. And this is something that conventional media might have a very tough time. So that's why I come back to my hypothesis. Let the 80% who believe that Trump had his election stolen from him not be my readers.
This is where my basic belief comes from, that people will get tired of being defrauded, of being misled, of being misinformed, and they will come back to the legacy media if we do not fall into the trap of catching more eyeballs and catching more, what is it called, the digital sort of presence all the time, going for the approval buttons and things like that. So we need, it's like freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is one of the fundamental achievements of our civilization. But freedom of expression also gives you freedom to lie, freedom to tell whatever you feel like, offend people. But for that, we don't give up freedom of expression. So all these abuses of journalism or freedom of expression or information, I think is our guarantee that people will come back to us if we hold on to our belief and faith and ethics.
Thank you, Mahfuz. At least we have something to act together, not just wishful thinking. From the screen, we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm just wondering whether our audience have any questions. So I like to open to the floor for the questions. So if anyone would like to ask questions, just raise your hand and introduce yourself a bit briefly and then ask questions.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm Stephen Small from the British Embassy. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion. I'm based here in Bangkok, but I also cover Myanmar. So I have a question about the role of Asian media as part of the international efforts to resolve the crisis in Myanmar. So I'd be interested to hear, first of all, how interested are your outlets and your readers in what's happening in Myanmar, and how much of an influence do you think that can have on your respective governments and the policies they're applying to the crisis in Myanmar? Thank you.
Would you like to ask anyone in particular? Or everyone?
Well, I mean, Indonesia is particularly interesting given they're taking up the chairmanship of ASEAN, so maybe a good place to start.
Yeah, I think the issue of Myanmar, and this is, I'm speaking about the general population, this is not really a popular issue in Indonesia. It becomes a really sort of major issues when it comes to the Rohingya people fleeing Myanmar, and they arrive in Aceh or in North Sumatra. That become sort of, at least this is going, that it was part of the conversation. But when it comes to what the junta has done, the jailing of the opposition leader or the de facto government, it has not really gained traction in Indonesia. And I think Indonesia, when Indonesia when Indonesia take up the leadership of ASEAN, I think, and this is, I'm speaking mostly about the foreign policy establishment in Jakarta, there is a serious amount of concern that not only the Indonesian leadership of ASEAN is at stake, but also the the ASEAN itself, its relevance, legitimacy is being questioned. So yeah, in the foreign policy establishment, and I think you can judge this from the quite a strong statement from Mr. Jokowi in the past summit. Yes, there is the intention of doing something different, but this is really what the foreign policy establishment, this is exclusively people in the foreign department and some section, small section in the quarter of Mr. Jokowi. But again, this is not something that rile people up in the country. This is not like some Palestinian occupation issue. So yeah, you have a lot of work to do when it comes to Myanmar's issue in Indonesia.
Okay. I think actually Mahfuz should be the right person to answer this, because the country that's bearing the brunt of the problem in Myanmar is Bangladesh, and to a smaller extent, perhaps Indonesia and India, where some of the refugees are coming. Now, I think the elephant in the room here is really China. The Indian foreign policy establishment isn't taking the position it ought to be as a democratic country on the denial of democratic rights, because the refrain that you hear from the Indian Foreign Office from time to time is that if we are too critical of the military in Myanmar, then we risk pushing them into the Chinese camp completely. Whereas much of the media has been very critical of that position. Much of the media has been taking the position that you would expect a responsible media to take, which is that there are human rights abuses taking place, that democracy is being throttled, and that it must be opposed. Journalists have been impacted. So we as fellow journalists feel for them. So on all these boxes are being ticked by the media. As far as popular interest in the Myanmar issue is concerned, I don't think there is very much. I think that would, I think if you go to England and ask people how interested they are, except for people who are interested in these issues of human rights, the average guy in London or wherever, Surrey or Edinburgh, wouldn't care two hoots about what's happening in Myanmar. I think that's true. I don't think we're going to come to a resolution of the situation in Myanmar in a hurry. If we can curb the excesses to a certain extent, if the huge humanitarian problem that Bangladesh is facing, it can be resolved to a certain extent, I think that might be the beginning. But I think Mahfuz is the right person to.
To me, Myanmar, treatment of the Rohingya population showed once again that ultimately nations take position on their geostrategic considerations, geopolitical self-interest, not on the basis of values. And this is very, very sad. And journalists are also a victim of that, but as I said, I'm very happy to see the role of the Indian media in this. And maybe the media all over the world should be more conscious of these clear violations. Now, in the case of Myanmar, it was an elected government which was in power, and nothing had happened for the military to take over. So in a case which is so clear, so blatant, so absolutely uncomplicated, if the world cannot take a considered position and always thinks, oh, I have trade with China and Myanmar is full of minerals, so my companies are going to go there and extract minerals, or that if I'm critical, is going to go into the Chinese camp and the Chinese are totally silent about it, This is really, I would say, another example of how geopolitics is so removed from, if you like, global values, that it actually brings down civilization as such. It actually brings down those countries who, at least proclaim to be democratic, and yet when it comes to the crunch, don't take any position. But of course, I am from Bangladesh. I am a personal witness to all this. I have visited those camps many, many times. And honestly speaking, we eulogized our government for opening the borders. But if this becomes the example, then no country in the world will ever take refugees again.
Yes, so our president, when he attended the ASEAN, he came on very strong, supporting the call for the implementation of the 5-point peace plan in Myanmar. The Philippines has always been for democracy in Myanmar and have always been on the side of democracy there. So I think our people also give importance to that because we can identify with the search for democracy. And so in fact, the major organizations there headlined the ASEAN position on Myanmar. And I think that's a very significant development, the last ASEAN statement.
Philip, would you like to mention about how you cover Myanmar?
Yeah, I'll answer that question very quickly. When I was covering the Malaysian election, I was really busy. Then one of my friend from the embassy called me and said, I really need to meet you. So I said, okay, let's meet up for 30 minutes. So then they asked me what's happening, etc. So I explained. And then I said, okay, I still got 1 minute for you, then I'm going off already because I'm really busy. And then this first secretary of embassy asked me, is the Rohingya issue important in the Malaysian election? Then I was like, I was really baffled. I was like, okay, yeah, why are you asking me? Don't you know that it's not even mentioned? It's not part of the policy or the Malaysia, it's very localized actually, the election. So to answer your question, that's my, yeah.
Thank you.
Don't ask me this kind of question when I'm really busy.
More questions? Okay.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. But the question is about the role of the media for the role of the Asian media in terms of the fast-changing world. I have the feeling that, for example, in Thai media, always portray about the negative sides, the bad things. I hardly see the good thing that coming from the people. So I would like to know about the media of your country, whether they share the same thing or not. Instead of the report about the positive things, and they report in the negative thing or not compared to Thailand. That's it.
So thank you, Ajahn. So let me turn to one last question. Yep. So you can think of answer. No news is good news. Is that good?
Very short answer.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question for the Philippines. Do you have any rule and regulation on how to report news during the election? Because I heard that during the presidential election, they have a lot of news and information from during the time of President Ferdinand Marcos that his era was very good and it did affect the presidential result on President Bongbong.
Okay, so the only regulation is about, whether it's libelous or not, but essentially we're still free to report. But during the elections, it's very challenging because of the lack of access given to the media. The president, our president, when he won, he really didn't give access to the professional media. He only have these social media influencers around him. So it's really difficult to ask your questions directly. So the independent media, we have to resort to other means of getting sources. So that's kind of difficult. And when he became president, the first press secretary wanted to accredit bloggers and vloggers along with the professional journalists. Thankfully, it didn't push through, but there's always that problem. It's really the access to the source that's a challenge. So we're left covering Facebook Live of the president, his posts on social media. So it's quite challenging. Thank you.
So So back
Should
to
I
you.
briefly answer
Yep,
her
sure.
question? I think we would all love to report positive news, and when we get a positive news story, we really latch on to it. Unfortunately, positive news has been kind of in short supply in the recent past.
And also, this is the thing, I mean, our role is to represent the people vis-a-vis the power of the day, the power from the government, power from political parties, power from big corporations. So ultimately, if you like, it is the critical facts which the public need to know to form independent opinion. That's where journalism comes from.
Yeah, I just answered the question. News is news. So it's bad news or good news, it's news. So we cover news. You can't balance bad news actually.
And you can't manufacture good news also.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if the news is bad, it's bad. If it's good, but we'll report it. So we don't take side in terms of, just say example, bad news. There's for example, in Indonesia, there was an earthquake. Technically, that's bad news, isn't it? But yeah, so yeah, we can't like pretend it didn't happen and write about some festival somewhere. Thanks.
Taufiq.
Yeah, well, maybe it's just one final point, and I have to agree with Mahfuz on this because I think journalism, and especially independent journalism, you have to question power, you have to question authority, and when you live in a developing countries like Indonesia, like Malaysia, like Thailand, you have a lot of problems of abuse of power, corruption, and you have to report on that. So we have to apologize if this create inconvenience, but we have to do this as independent journalism should do it. Thank you.
And we did predict that what Nostradamus said about Narendra Modi. For instance, during the pandemic, a lesser-known Bollywood star decided to spend a lot of time and money on moving poor people who'd lost their jobs because of the lockdowns back to their villages. That was one of the biggest stories. It was a good news story. So it isn't that you ignore it, but they're few and far between.
Juliet, last point.
Yeah, I agree. We need to report the bad and the beautiful and the ugly, both of them. But as our gentleman friends here said, the duty of the journalists is to highlight the issues that really affect people's lives, affect our countries. So, and most of those issues are negative. For example, problems in geopolitics are usually negative. So that's where we come in as journalists to make people understand why these things are happening and what's the implication to their lives. But I agree, that's always the complaint of readers is you only report the negative, but you don't report the positive. But we do sometimes, But more the problems, that's our duty to report. Thank you.
There's always TikTok for happy news.
Okay, so
Philip's going there soon.
yeah. So that wraps up this panel discussion on challenges and roles of Asian media. We have challenges lying ahead of us, not only geopolitics, but media disruption itself. And we still have basic high-quality journalism that we have to hold on to. And thank you very much for 5 of you who hold on to good journalism as we know it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.